and at age 24, when Perkins and Russell merged their companies to form the most powerful American house in China, young Robert secured the lucrative post of running the Linton operation. Forbes left China in 1834 to marry Rose Green Smith, and he almost lost his fortune in the Panic of 1837. Seeking to rebuild his wealth, Forbes went back to China and played a prominent role in the outbreak of the Opium War, during which Russell and Company prospered. Forbes was made the head of the company, replacing John C. Green. By 1850 Forbes owned interests in more than 60 ships, and 258 from the sacred to the profane was the American vice-consul to China and France. In his later life, Forbes was noted for his contribution to the United States Navy during the Civil War, and he became the first Commodore of the Boston Yacht Club. The syndicate, the early shipping business, was unusually risky, and the loss of a single ship was a disaster to some companies. Often the way to spread the risk was to syndicate the business, so that merchants took shares in one another's companies. In addition to the Perkins and Russell syndicates, a third syndicate drew in some important personages. Augustine Hurd was an Ipswich merchant whose father participated in the often illegal molasses and sugar trade. He too relished the thought of getting revenge on the harsh and restrictive trade laws that favored the home country at the expense of the colonies, so he became a privateer. Hurd started his career in the counting house, and then became a supercargo. In 1807 he sailed to Smyrna aboard the Betsy.15. The Hurd Company started by selling ginseng and otter skins, but soon joined the opium trade. Hurd's partners included John Forbes, John Green, and Joseph Coolidge. The American base of the opium trade moved south from the ports of New England to New York. Families who were prominent in Connecticut became equally important in New York. Ultimately, the drug smuggling families would attain the White House. Chapter 15: Opium. From the lodge to the den. During the glory years of the China trade, New York succeeded Boston as the center of American shipping. Ships and warehouses lined South Street's 3-mile-long stretch of piers a few short blocks from Wall Street's Ontein Coffee House, which served as the center of the growing financial industry. The waterfront was so busy that spectators came to watch the hustle of dockworkers, shipbuilders, and auctioneers. Hammers clanged, barrels rolled, auctioneers shouted, and thousands worked hard building and loading ships. Skilled labor was so in demand that a sailmaker was paid a previously unheard of $4 a day. Ships sailed from New York to all ports. Similar to New England's Brahmin families, many New York families achieved great wealth in the drug trade. American shippers had as many excuses for involvement in the trade as their British counterparts. And like the British, the Americans had less to offer as exports, and the new country became the dumping ground for British wares. The American families brought to China ginseng, fuzz, and opium, their only valued goods. It should be noted that the trade was not illegal in the United States. What has become labeled the China trade, which included opium, fuzz, and furniture, reduces the stigma that might be perceived in modern times. Not all of the China traders carried opium, and their activity was not considered criminal. The laws that were 259-260 from the sacred to the profane broken were only those of another nations, a common enough attitude in colonial expansionist times. Although the morality of the opium trade was questioned by a handful, both the British and American governments had no quarrel with any aspects of the China trade. New York's wealthiest citizen, America's richest opium smuggler, was possibly John Jacob Astor. In 1800 Astor was worth $250,000, when the average American family had an income of $750. When he died in 1848, his wealth was equal to almost 1% of the entire country's gross national product. 1. Astor's wealth was made in numerous ways, but his opium fortune was a direct result of the British East India Company's granting him a license to sell furs to China and to engage in the opium trade. The fur business was soon abandoned in all but name. In 1860, Astor's American Fur Company actually sailed directly to Turkey to buy 10 tons of opium, which was then sold illegally in Canton. Astor's rapid rise to great wealth is an unlikely story. The son of a German butcher, Astor came to America in 1784 at age 21. He reportedly spoke very little English, although he had lived for a short time in London. He is described as having no grace, charm, or wit, He is even said to have once wiped his hands on the table linens at a dinner party. Yet Astor's gruff manners and poor English did not stop him from rapidly entering society. He quickly married into wealth and breeding in the form of Sarah Todd of New York's Brevet family. To this connection most likely prompted his invitation to join New York's most prestigious Masonic lodge, the Holland No. 8. Here he mingled with Archibald Russell, the Livingstons, DeWitt Clinton and George Clinton, and members of New York's other first families. The Holland No. 8 Lodge was founded in 1787, after negotiating with the Masons, to be allowed to hold meetings in the Low Dutch language. At first the new lodge admitted only 8 members. The num opium. From the lodge to the den 261 were 8 is significant to elite masonry. There were 8 original Templar Knights, there are 8 points on the Masonic cross, and there were 8 prominent and wealthy New Yorkers in the new lodge. From his new connections Astor discovered the lucrative fur pelt business. Pelts that could be bought for $1 from a New York Indian could fetch 6 times the price in London. 3 Astor typically cheated the Indians by getting them drunk, and then overcharging for the liquor. 4 He cheated his own workers with low-paying contracts, although his own records show he was more generous in bribes. He once made a $35,000 payment to Michigan Governor Lewis Cass. 5 In short, Astor prospered in the fur business. Astor's proceeds from the fur trade were invested into New York City real estate during the year Washington was elected president, and New York was in recession. And Astor instinctively knew how to take advantage of people. For example, when Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton in a duel, Burr had to flee the country, and so Astor bought Burr's Greenwich Village home for cash. In 1825 Astor bought land from the United States government, and immediately evicted 700 farmers. Astor's China connections were made through his fur business, as the Chinese bought beaver pelts that Astor's trappers and traders took from New York and the Oregon Territory. He was the first New York merchant to join the China trade, and soon he replaced the furs with opium. In 1807 New York City entered another recession as the Embargo Act stopped shipping. A letter from Punko Wing-chong, a visiting Chinese merchant and demander and connected to the ruling family in China, claimed the embargo had stranded him in New York City, and requested permission from President Jefferson to be allowed to sail home. Jefferson made an exception and asked on what ship he intended to sail. Punko Wing-chong requested the Beaver, an Astor ship. The ship left New York with Punko Wing-chong and a hull full of furs. When it returned Jefferson discovered that Punko Wing-chong was not a merchant but a dockhand, and the voyage was a ruse created by Astor. The 262 from the sacred to the profane Beaver made a $200,000 profit from the trip. The profit was put into still another farm, which extended from Broadway to the Hudson in Midtown New York. 6 But the American government got even when it went to war with Britain. Astor lost his fur capital in Astoria, Oregon, which was worth $800,000. Nevertheless, Astor's drug business grew unhindered. In writing he requested that a Constantinople merchant please send returns in opium for a consignment of 1,500 Red Fox furs. 7 With 3 separate fleets sailing the world, Astor made enough drug and belt money to dip into an immense amount of real estate. By 1826 the German immigrant who made his fortune in America was buying mortgages of Irish immigrants and foreclosing on them to add to his holdings at lower prices. 8 In 1847 Moses Yale Beach compiled a list of the wealthiest New Yorkers. Some had $1 million or $2 million. Astor towered above them. 9 Astor stopped at nothing to increase his fortune. In 1848 he was 84 years old and extremely wealthy, yet he still demanded rent even from widows. He died in March of that year, and his second son,